this was hard for me to realize, right? I had gone through some really hard technical exams to get these badges, to then realize once I've attained this and sort of proverbially on top of the mountain, that all that stuff is being commoditized and quickly. There are algorithms that can build portfolios quicker than me, more efficiently than me, cheaper than me, work 24/7 to calibrate them. Why would I compete with a machine like that? It would be stupid to do so. So again, that's another sort of self-realization and a conversation I had with myself that made me figure I need to double down on being human.
Welcome to episode 28 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Amyr Rocha-Lima, who is a partner at Holland, Hahn & Wills in the UK. In this episode, Amyr walks us through his career journey, from how he missed the dress code memo for his very first interview, to the serendipitous connection that led him to join Holland, Hahn & Wills to begin the firm's succession plan. Amyr shares how investing in himself and continued learning has benefited him throughout his career. And listen till the end, where he provides a valuable challenge for all of us. Links to everything we mention and show notes are at innovatingadvice.com/episode 28. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Hi, Amyr. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Kate. Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great to see you with your quarantine beard going on. We're all a little more relaxed these days. And Amyr, one of the goals of the Innovating Advice Show is really to continue to propel the profession forward and moving away from product-centric advice and sales towards that goals and values-based advice. And your career has gone through that journey. And you have taken the journey that a lot of people do, but they don't often get to where you've ended up. And I love where you're at now and how you got there. So I want to make sure we share that with the listeners today. And let's start with your very first interview in the industry. How did you get that interview and how did it go?
Yeah, so thank you actually, Kate, for bringing that up. That brings back some fond memories because as you said, I'm sporting this lockdown look. I've never grown a beard before. I didn't think I could grow one, but apparently I can.
It looks great.
Semi-beard. And thank you. And I'm wearing a polo shirt and some chinos. And funny enough, the first interview I ever had was with a company called AXA. I think a lot of your listeners will know of AXA. It's a multinational insurance and asset management firm. And I actually turned up to that interview wearing a shirt, but chinos, rather than sort of like a suit. Now, don't ask me why I did that. It just shows you how sort of wet behind the ears I was at the time with regards to understanding financial services as a sector and sort of the expectations one would typically have in terms of creating a first impression and things like that. But so thankfully I did get hired by AXA, so I don't think it mattered too much that I showed up with chinos for my first interview, but very quickly I caught on to the fact that sort of a dark blue suit would suit me better actually going forward.
Yes. And how did you feel about that, moving into the suit? Because being a casual person, sometimes it can feel a bit stuffy having to go into the suit with the mahogany desk and kind of take on this different persona. Did it feel natural or did it feel like, okay, this is something I have to do to be in this industry?
For me, it felt very natural. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm not that fashionable. And you can see that in the video now. And I mean this honestly. It might sound like a joke, but I've said this a ton of times to other people when they say, oh, you always seem to be wearing a suit. And not only a suit, I own 5 suits. They are all dark blue. And basically, I just don't want to have the thought process of having to think of matching like a cool jacket with a cool pair of chinos. I'm just not that fashionable. I don't know how to do that. So knowing that I can just wear a dark blue suit and a shirt, excellent. I love that.
Yeah. It's going that uniform look. And how many high achieving people talk about it? It's the Steve Jobs thing, right? Just you've got so many great things to think about. Don't have fashion be one of them. Just create a good look, go with it every day. I think that's
pretty
awesome.
Much. Yep.
So you started in AXA and you were a phone-based broker, right? So you were really on that product side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, pretty much one notch above the T-boy. I mean, it really was dealing with customer complaints, dealing, and the customers in this occasion were financial planners. So this is the side of AXA, the asset management side of AXA, that dealt with financial advisors and financial planners and selling them the AXA solutions to enhance their businesses and enhance their clients' financial plans. So it started at the sort of lowest of levels, really dealing with the paperwork on transferring assets, and just the sort of client support service role that you would expect. But thankfully, very quickly, I got paired up with some fairly successful people inside AXA that were a few notches above that and a few steps above that in terms of the corporate ladder. And what I could see clearly, Kate, was that financial services as a sector, at least here in the UK, it had a pretty clear professional progression track that sat alongside a professional qualification or technical qualification track.
Yep.
And if you matched one with the other, you could find yourself being promoted inside a company and actually being able to go for higher positions or just different roles that were more interesting in their own ways. And I just caught onto that like bushfire. I just thought, this is amazing. Now, in hindsight, I appreciate that many professional services sectors offer this sort of career track sitting alongside a professional track. I must admit, again, at the time, I just wasn't aware of that. Sort of, I grew up in Brazil. I'm originally from Brazil. That's why I've got this quite interesting sounding name. And sort of schooling in Brazil basically taught me that there were a couple of professions to strive for, engineering, doctor or lawyer. And maybe if you're a bit eccentric, you might become a diplomat. And, that's what basically the schooling over there offered me as the different career tracks to pursue.
Wow.
So it was great to see, well, not only find this sector that I wasn't aware of, financial services, but also find that the profession offered this professional qualification track that I could run right alongside the job I was actually doing day in, day out. And I just absolutely love that.
That's great. And you said that AXA encouraged that, like encouraging you going down that path, but you weren't working directly with clients. Like you said, you were working with IFAs. So what was your understanding at that time of how to work with clients? And as you started to pursue these professional qualifications, was there a bit of a gap there in terms of what you were learning and what you got to experience day to day?
Massively, massively. So I must admit, when I joined AXA, I didn't even know that financial planning as a thing actually existed, as a profession actually existed. I didn't know much at all about the stock market, about how investments worked, about tax wrappers and products that would shelter wealth. I was oblivious to all of this, Kate. That didn't form part of my upbringing. So for me, it was fascinating day one. And the technical side of it was great to get your teeth sunk into it and know how to solve problems with technical solutions. But you're absolutely right. The more I progressed and the more I got to see what the financial planner on the other side of that call was actually doing for the client, the more I saw there was a gap between the technical stuff I was doing and what they were actually delivering in terms of a solution to the end client.
Yeah. And you had a bit of an epiphany later on in your career journey, but we'll get to that in a minute. So you kind of kept going with AXA, and then you were headhunted by MetLife. So kind of jumping insurance to insurance. And again, you were selling.
Yeah, very much so. And MetLife were launching their variable annuity range in the UK. I know this is a product that had traction for probably more than a decade in the US, and great traction for that. And in the US, this was a developed market with many competitors. In fact, I believe AXA even had a product along those lines in the US as well. But nonetheless, in the UK, this was new. This was basically talking to retirement planning financial planners so that they could offer a very innovative solution to their clients' retirement plan in the form of a variable annuity. And I won't go as far as trying to explain what a variable annuity is to your listeners. I'm sure they're aware of the product already. But suffice to say, that was a novel way of solving the income sequence of return problem for UK-based retirees. So it was great. I got exposed to a niche rather than just AXA that had products that could cater for anything and anyone. So I was exposed to MetLife's niche in the UK, which was retirement planning. I got to work with some of MetLife's sort of senior vice presidents from across the world when they came to the UK to present to UK clients and to UK financial planners. And I just absolutely loved it. I just thought, this is great. And as a young person who had a role model in my life in the form of my grandfather, who was older than me, I never felt any struggle with talking to older folks, be they my clients, because they were a couple of decades older than me as financial planners in the UK, or equally talking to the end client who were retirees or people just pre-retirement in their early 60s.
Interesting. That's great. And you have said that the company was very big on soft skills. So you were doing CPD seminars at the time. What continuing professional development? What were those seminars on?
Yeah, so initially my thought was, and this goes just back to business development skills, right? So I was given a patch in the UK, like a geographical patch, to try to develop the MetLife business. And that included London as a region, not just London as a city, and also a county that borders with London called Buckinghamshire, which is a pretty huge county. Proportionately speaking, your US listeners might think it's tiny, but proportionately speaking, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that the way I could get the message across so I could have more conversations quicker than individually calling different firms was to run local continuous professional development seminars. So these would be CPD seminars. For your US listeners, these are CE credits. So advisors would have a vested interest in going to these seminars to sort of gain some of these hours that they need to do anyway for their continuous learning. But I wanted to put a twist on it. So effectively, we focused that on retirement planning and also on a problem. So rather than a product, we focused on the sequence of returns problem. And this was gaining a lot of traction at the time in all sorts of financial planning literature from across the world. So I think it was just a bit of, without knowing, a bit of clickbait that attracted enough eyeballs to say, you know what, I can spare 2 hours or an hour on a Wednesday morning. I'm going to get a great breakfast anyway, so I might as well get a great breakfast, listen to these guys who are new in the UK, talking about a problem that is actually relevant for my clients, and then we'll take it from there. And thankfully, for some of those CPD seminars, I had access to Joe Jordan, who was a senior vice president at MetLife. And some of your listeners might know him from his keynote speeches that he does at conferences around the world, and also from his book, which is called Living a Life of Significance. And it's a pretty interesting take on financial planning and the good that we can do for our clients.
Great. And I'll link to that in the show notes, because I think it's always good to know what books are out there that kind of talk about propelling the profession forward. And as you've done this, that's so awesome that your timing worked out perfectly. That doesn't always happen, but that's always nice when it does. And so you brought Joe Jordan into one of these CBD seminars, and that's when you had one of your biggest aha moments in your career, right?
100%. So what happened was this, Kate. I brought Joe. So Jordan would come. Joe Jordan would come to the UK, and he would stay here for, say, a month, right? So obviously there were different broker consultants in different parts of the country that were bidding to take him around. And thankfully, my sales numbers were good enough that, when I pitched the idea to my manager, it made sense. It was a no-brainer for them to try to enhance the good work we were doing in my region. So we set up the seminar, and Joe was there to talk about the MetLife products, but he didn't talk about products at all. And he absolutely floored me. And I'll go as far as saying that he floored the audience as well, with the fact that he didn't speak about products at all. And instead he focused on what is it that financial planners do that no other profession is doing for their clients. And he basically focused on two things: that we, as retirement planning focused financial planners, can offer our clients dignity and independence throughout their retirement. And there is no other profession that is doing that for them. And when somebody starts a keynote speech like that, not by saying, here's our new product, or it really does stop the sound. You can hear a pin drop, because suddenly you go, wait a second. What is this? What's happening here? And then to actually tell a story that is true. And if we are a little bit introspective as to what we do as retirement planners, we will see that what Joe is doing is verbalizing the actual work we do. It was just really powerful. And it was powerful enough that for me, I started questioning what my value was long term. And I thought to myself, you know what? I could have a lot more impact if I could cut the middleman and deal with the client directly.
Yep.
And that middleman was me. I was the guy between the financial planner and the client. And I suddenly felt, as I kept hearing this message and Joe kept working with me on these CPD seminars, I started feeling that perhaps my role going forward should be more on the financial planning side at the coal face rather than as an intermediate.
Yeah. And what year was that?
So the year in which the penny really dropped for me was 2008. And the reason why it dropped in that manner was because also from a family perspective, I witnessed, as I said, my role model, who I mentioned earlier, my grandfather, battle through a motor neuron disease that eventually took his life. Okay. Now your listeners might be thinking, Amyr, well, that's a weird segue. How did you get to that from financial planning and retirement planning? Well, the reality is the aftermath of that was that my grandmother, who's now 94 years old, I think, she has been able to continue to live the lifestyle that her and my grandfather had worked so hard to achieve in the first place. You know, he didn't leave a financial mess behind. And that's
awesome.
Massive when I look at it now. When I look at the peace of mind with all the difficulties that death in a family and the bereavement that brings, the peace of mind that was left behind because my grandfather's financial circumstances were set up correctly, well, that meant that he's left a legacy of dignity and independence to his spouse and to his children and to his grandchildren. And that was massive, right? So everything linked. Suddenly my personal family story linked with the work I was aiming to achieve through other financial planners. And I really felt that I wanted now to become a financial planner myself. So, of course, the penny drops, but there's a lag between the penny dropping and you actually gearing yourself up through additional professional qualifications, additional training, so that eventually you can put yourself in a position to go for an actual financial planning role.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so from your first interview in chinos, the way the whole story went, it kind of ended up becoming your calling.
Huge. Yeah. And I would just urge your listeners who haven't done this already, Kate, have a look at your own story. Look, we're in the middle of this global pandemic, right? That's interrupted business as we know it. It's interrupted life as we know it. Even though I think most people are being able to adjust and adapt, human beings are great at adapting. This is a chance to perhaps just try to find half an hour to an hour and just stop everything and just think, what's my life story? What is it in my life, in my family's life? What is it that has changed? And what is it that has always perhaps been there and I've never noticed that my work can help make better? You will find something in your story, and then you've got the fire. That's it. That's all you need. You've lit the torch, and then you just need to run. And then you don't go and speak with people anymore about products. Those are just the financial solutions to the personal finance side of things. You focus on the personal of the personal finance side of things. You go for that. And then what happens is you understand the personal, you know the finance, you've done all the qualifications, you can match the money with the life the clients are trying to achieve, and they will turn around to you and say, why hasn't anybody ever told me this?
Yeah.
Or why is it that I've had all these products, and I've been sold stuff ethically by private banks and other financial advisors, but I've never been told that I have enough, or I've never been told that I can take that trip on a first class ticket rather than an economy ticket. And it's just amazing when you have these conversations and you see other people realize things that their money can do to really fulfill that life they're aiming to achieve and then maintain throughout retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And that's fantastic advice. But we're talking back in 2008 at this point when that penny dropped for you. And that's pre-RDR, the Retail Distribution Review. So I would imagine conversations as they are around the world today, they were still very product-led and they weren't planning-led. So how did you start to bring those two together, and where did you learn those soft skills? Did they come naturally, or were there additional qualifications? Because one of the things we see is a lot of the professional qualifications, and you've mentioned it yourself, are really on the technical side. So having that technical knowledge is one thing, but being able to bring it back and have those conversations that you were just talking about, that's a whole different skill set.
Absolutely. And Kate, from my perspective, I championed personally all the technical qualifications I could achieve before I even noticed that I needed to work on my empathy skills and on my being human skills. I had it in my mind, and again, this is probably just part of my upbringing, that education is the way forward. So when I saw, way back when at AXA, when I saw that technical qualification track sitting next to a professional career track, I just went gung-ho. And I took every single professional qualification you could get in the UK, right? So I've got, I'm a chartered financial planner, which is the highest level of financial planning qualification you can get from one professional body. I'm a CFP professional, which is the highest level you can get from the other body. And the more I did these professional qualifications, the more I knew my stuff. And that confidence allowed me to explore some more of this life side of things to then match the client's money with that life they wanted to live, right? But that was still lacking. And I could notice that was lacking. I was still more of a technical planner than somebody who really was trying to put financial life planning as a movement into action at my firm. So I reached out to people I respected in the profession. From all around the world. I sent emails to people that weren't local. I picked up the phone to UK-based planners that I respected a lot. And just through exploring different routes, I ended up studying with the Kinder Institute of Life Planning. And I think what the Kinder Institute did was just help me unearth some of these qualities that we all have around listening and around being empathetic with people when they're telling their story. So I can tell you this categorically, Kate. I'm not the most interesting guy out there. I don't have any particular hobbies that make me stand out. I'm not great at any sport or anything like that I can sort of naturally bond with other people with. I'm a fairly sort of average Joe. So it's not about having something like that. It really is just about maybe starting a conversation by saying, what prompted you to contact the financial planner in the first place? Yeah. And then shutting up and then listening. And then, people maybe give you a half answer because it's the first time they've been asked that instead of being pitched. This is what we do, Mr. Client and Mrs. Client. So then instead of jumping into this is what we do, you might just take a bit of a pause and say, okay, that's interesting. Is there anything else? And they might just develop that a bit further. You know what? Actually, there is something else, Amyr, and it's X, Y, and Z. And you just develop that conversation by asking open-ended questions, shutting up, and listening. And it doesn't take many. It doesn't take many for the client to be talking for 10, 15 minutes and really feeling like finally somebody is hearing me out.
And Amyr, that's such a key point, is ask a question and shut up. That is something that advisors are not always great at. And I crack up when I'm at conferences and even when you're talking with colleagues and it's like they're permanently in pitch mode of trying to just keep talking. And you're right. You just need to ask a question and be quiet. And that's lessons we could take into our personal lives as well. That's a skill that transcends business, personal, and everywhere in between.
Absolutely.
And Amyr, you ended up paying for like the Kinder Institute of Life Planning. You did that yourself, right? That wasn't paid for by any of your employers.
Yeah, very much so. So most of my professional qualifications and also the studies I did at the Kinder Institute, I self-funded them. And, the way I thought about it, Kate, was this. The only thing nobody can ever take away from you is education. You can call that an immigrant mindset. You can call that something else. I don't know. But I just fundamentally believe in that. Nobody can take away the education that you gain and the learning that you proactively seek. Everything else can go. So I just saw no loss. Rather than spending the money on a new car, not that it's the equivalent, but you know what I mean, rather than or going on sort of an extra fancy holiday or something like that, I was just pretty chill on that front. And I decided to just employ my pounds, shillings, and pence towards professional learning and professional education. And I see that still today. I get contacted by younger financial planners than me. I'm in my mid-30s. I'm considered sort of a next-gen planner. I'm getting calls from folks in their 20s, and they're just rocking it already. It's unreal. And they're saying, my employer won't support me on this conference or that conference. And the way I sort of pitch it, and this might sound a bit black and white, but, a really good night out in London will cost you at least £150.
Yep.
Right? That's it. That's the cost of the ticket to the conference and the train journey from wherever you are to that conference and back. It's one great night out in London that you're foregoing to enhance your education and also meet some of the people that you perhaps only know through Twitter or through your professional body of choice. So when you think of it like that, well, suddenly it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, and it's an actual investment. So as you said, it can't be taken away from you. It's a true investment. It doesn't leave you, versus there's a pretty good chance you're going to forget that night you had, even 6 months later. It'll just be a distant memory that might have been fun, but was it really worth it in the long run? So Amyr, you left MetLife and you were at sort of a traditional IFA firm. So I always like knowing terminology that people use. So what would you consider a traditional IFA firm? And was that still very product-led at that time?
Yeah, and it was very product-led, ethically so. But the goal of the firm was, and I think to a certain extent still is today, to match a product to a need.
Yep.
And once they've matched the product to a need, that's it. That's the end of the value chain. Next. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I would say that a lot of people talk about the advice gap and trying to offer more advice solutions to people who perhaps can't afford a specialist advice service. Well, guess what? That can only be filled by ethically selling solutions to people's needs. Be that via some sort of fancy UI and a decision tree, or be that via just a cohort of financial planners, be it telephone-based or virtual-based or whatever it is. So I've got nothing against selling to a need, especially when done so ethically. But for me, Kate, the realization, and it still is the case, in fact, more so than ever, is that is quickly getting commoditized. And this is, again, another thing that I ask your listeners who haven't thought about, perhaps take just a few minutes to think about so far, because this was hard for me to realize, right? I had gone through some really hard technical exams to get these badges, to then realize once I've attained this and sort of proverbially on top of the mountain, that all that stuff is being commoditized and quickly. There are algorithms that can build portfolios quicker than me, more efficiently than me, cheaper than me, work 24/7 to calibrate them. Why would I compete with a machine like that? It would be stupid to do so. So again, that's another sort of self-realization and a conversation I had with myself that made me figure I need to double down on being human. Right? That's where the value is. That is not commoditizable, at least not right now. Right? So that's what I'm going to focus on. And I can say that not without taking the technical exams, but after taking the technical exam. So I can say that with a certain level of authority, but to myself, let alone to anybody else. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of technically correct advice. Don't get me wrong. And I'm a big fan of being innovative with taxation and with products and matching those in the right way so the client can get the best outcome. But I think very quickly an algorithm not only is doing that better, but will progressively so do that much better than we ever could, which means our value will be on this human side of the advice. It will be as a coach. It will be as paying attention so that the client, through their own behaviors, don't ruin their financial plan.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are the things that, when I started realizing those, cost versus value, I saw that it was worth me spending the money to get trained to be able to gain that value for myself and then offer that value to clients. Awesome. So to go back to your question, it came to a point, it was a sort of a 5-year journey with this first firm I worked with, that I was basically running a mini business inside, quite frankly, a small business. And I just didn't see the point in carrying on like that. So through a mutual connection, a consultant in the UK who works with sort of restructuring businesses and making sure they're prepped up for the future, we just a bit of serendipity, I guess. We just started talking about my career aspirations and some of the firms this guy was working with. And he said, "Hey, I'm working with a firm that's looking for a guy like you. And it seems like you're looking for a firm like them. So why don't you guys meet for coffee?" And that's where sort of the conversation started with my current firm, Holland, Hahn & Wills, which of course now I'm a partner at, and we're very much taking that business model forward and also the firm's own succession planning forward as well.
Well, and Amyr, what's so unique about that is it wasn't just that Helen Hanna's and Will's was looking for a planner or looking for a planner that specialized in retirement planning and had all the qualifications. They were looking for someone that could actually start the succession planning process. And that is not something that we see very often. There's this huge gap happening in the profession, and I was in meetings more than 10 years ago, and so it doesn't seem like it's getting any better. But as planners do age and they've built these great practices, I think I saw just the other day, we're still at something like 79% of them have no succession plan and have not even started down that. So share with us a little bit about how they actually came to realize that that was the right thing to do and bring you in. And you became a partner after, I think it was just a year. So talk us through how some of that has gone.
Yeah. Okay. So I think they started out this exploration by just being honest with themselves. My three other business partners, the founders of the firm, they are all in their late 50s or early 60s. And they basically looked themselves in the mirror and said, we need to think about how we end this chapter eventually of our lives. Won't be now. We have no ambition to do it straight away, but we need to have a plan as to how we do that. I think what happened was this. They were courted by some of these financial planning firm consolidators, some of these vertical integrators. They went down that journey with them to really work out the numbers and see what it would mean. And whilst the check that these guys were potentially promising them might have been attractive, they were most definitely not attractive by what the result of that would be for both themselves and their clients. They didn't fancy being put on a target again at this stage in their life and having to work through this remuneration structure that would last about 5 years to get fully paid out. And they also weren't too happy about trying to sort of milk some non-existent value out of their clients, some of which they've worked with for some 20 plus years. So it really is as simple as that. They started this conversation like everybody else should probably start it.
Yes.
Right. So once they've discounted that route, they then coincidentally started getting clients asking them, now, you talk to me a lot about my retirement plans. What are your retirement plans? Because you're not getting any younger.
Awesome.
So the next stage of their thinking was, well, if we can find a financial planner that is younger than us, well, of course, we need to start with that in mind as a sort of a want. But that also has the right attitude, the right qualifications, and believes in philosophically in financial planning and investment management like we do. Perhaps we can take a leaf out of the accountancy profession, out of the law profession, and create a partnership agreement and then a succession plan within that partnership agreement that sort of slowly phases us out and slowly phases the new generation in. So that's the conversation we had, and that's exactly what we're doing, Kate. And I will say this to you in all honesty, it is not easy. It's not an easy conversation. We've had a business consultant to mediate that conversation because egos really do need to be left at the door. There are some hard conversations around numbers, some uncomfortable conversations around the value that different people bring to the business in different ways. But we're through that stage, somewhat pretty painful at times, but also just that there's a relief once things that needed to be said are said. And then we can work on how the structure should work going forward. What's the sort of initial point? What are the milestones? And what are the next steps? Right. So that's where we're at now. And again, we didn't really have a financial planning firm that we could just copy and paste a blueprint from. We really needed to go into the accountancy profession, into the law profession to find some sort of succession planning agreement that has been tried and tested before. So that's what we're doing.
That's great. And that is such an important part, is having that external person, because I actually went through this. I was my mother's succession plan. So the idea was I was going to take over the family business. And so we went down the same route you were talking about. We talked with those verticals. We looked at what that meant. And for us, where it we realized it didn't work is I wanted to take the firm in a different direction. And it was an investment advisory firm only, so it didn't do financial planning. I wanted to introduce that. I wanted to work with younger clients as well. I wanted to make all of these changes. And my mother's my hugest fan. We're best friends, so she super supported me when I left to start my own thing. But I think one of the things that is a really good fit that you have found is you have always loved that retirement planning, and that's what your firm focuses on. And so you were actually the perfect fit there. So as you look going forward and some of your tough conversations, are you wanting to make a lot of changes in the firm, or is it a good fit because they've done it so well and you're going to keep it going sort of as is?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally it's a good fit, but 2.5 years into the business, I've already definitely been part of modifying quite a few of the internal structures, the
Yep.
workflows, and the actual tools that we need to use to be able to offer the service we want to offer. So the firm was pretty successful. It didn't really need to make any changes to be able to just maintain the client base happy. But that wasn't the point. And that's not the ambition from the founders either. They are keen to take the firm forward and then really make the succession plan a success. And for that to happen, the firm needs to be moving forward. It cannot be walking backwards. So they've been very much open to the suggestions that I've helped implement in terms of how we market the firm locally, in terms of the value that we want to bring to our clients, in terms of the way we have conversations with our clients. These are all ongoing structural changes that we're making to the firm, but fundamentally, it's a good fit. And let me give your listeners an understanding of that. So I'm a firm believer in evidence-based investing, right? I've read all the data. I did a master's in wealth management at a pretty decent business school in London. And I came out the other end thinking, not even they convinced me that I should be going into heavily active managed funds or hedge funds for that matter, or anything like that. So we subscribe to an evidence-based investment philosophy. That's fundamental. That is core. No changes required. So my business partners and I all fundamentally believe that's the case, right? If there was a massive difference in that, you can imagine that the conversation would be going slightly different. So I just wanted to sort of pitch in your listeners' minds some of the things that are core. Financial planning first, financial products second. An evidence-based investment approach that is there solely to power the financial plan, not to cater for my ego or to pretend that I can somehow, quote unquote, beat the market. These are things that we fundamentally agree on. So there's no need to discuss that. We just enhance that. We just find ways to make that more visual for clients, to make that more meaningful for clients, and also to make sure our clients understand that that's what we're all about. But there's no shift needed there. The shifts perhaps are more in terms of how we go about our business. What are the key components we need in the business that perhaps we're lacking? Where should we focus our next hire, where perhaps in the past that was not needed? So for example, we hired a lady about a year ago who came to us from an asset manager called Dimensional, which a lot of your listeners will know about. And she was basically the operations person over there, and she's now the operations person in our business. So now we have somebody who is solely focused on helping us structure the operations of our business, and their background is from a multinational asset manager. So that's where we're focusing our energy and our conversations. And of course, that comes with trade-offs, because there's a whole salary package and a flexible working package that you need to put in place to be able to attract somebody like that from a firm like Dimensional. But nonetheless, if that's the difficult conversations we're having now, I think we're all better for it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And huge kudos to your partners, because that isn't something that a lot of people do. They don't seem to sit down and have those honest conversations and be thoughtful. They either wait till it's too late, or they're inflexible and not willing to evolve. And so it sounds like you've really got a great situation there, Amyr, that not a lot of people seem to find. But hopefully you guys are actually creating that blueprint that you were looking for. So where you had to pull from other professions, as you continue to go through this, I imagine that's going to be setting the stage for other people. And Amyr, we've covered so much. I love your story. And one of the highlights I believe you've had recently, as we wrap up here, is that you got to present at the Back to Why conference. So just share with listeners, for those who don't know, briefly what the Back to Why conference is and why it's such a special place.
Yeah, so Back to Why is a bit of an alternative financial planning conference, in the sense that it's independent. So you need to pay a ticket to attend. and there are no sponsors. So really, there isn't even a free pen and a pad for you to take notes. It really is all about the content. If you need a pen and a pad, you should be capable of taking your own, right?
Yes.
It's quite interesting in that sense. And traditionally, what Back to Why has been all about is creating a collection of keynote presenters that talk about why it's important for you to go back to your why, which is what we've been talking about throughout this conversation. So the conference's founder, a guy called Paul Armstrong, he invited me in 2018 to basically rock up and do a keynote on my journey, some of which I've shared with your listeners throughout this presentation. And I'll make sure for your listeners that are interested, I'll share a link to my sort of personal website where they can watch that presentation in their own time. But suffice to say that it was just all about showing some pretty experienced advisors who were coming from all corners of the world to this conference, that it's never too old to look at yourself, look at your own story, and just try to find why it is that you do what you do, and also find the thing that you can do for people that no other profession is doing. And like I said, Kate, I lead with dignity and independence throughout retirement. I've experienced this myself in my family. I've seen my clients experience this through the work we do. That's what I lead with. This is what I fundamentally believe I can offer as a value proposition to my clients. Everything else is secondary. And the presentation was basically to tell the audience in 20 minutes, effectively in a TED talk, how I got to this moment and why it has helped me in developing my career and our business. And just urging people to spend the time, and it doesn't take much, just to look at themselves and find their own why.
Yep. And it's important, I think, to continually go back to why and remind yourself and check in with yourself. Is that still your why? Has your why shifted? Have you gotten so busy with day-to-day stuff that you got away from your why and you need to go back to it? So what a perfect thing to end on. Amyr, thank you for sharing your story, for everything that you've gone through, for being a great example to other young planners in this profession, that there is a path to succession at some firms, to keep seeking it out and to invest in themselves, because that's what it is. It's an investment. No one can take that knowledge away from you. It was fantastic. Amyr, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm really loving the work you're doing, bringing all sorts of different folks in our profession to your podcast. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and shoot me a thought or two. Link to my profile is right below. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to hearing from you.